Hi BookTube, it's Amy. Things are opening up in the province of Ontario once again, and this morning I wandered on down to Bank Street and went to the book bazaar for the second time this year. I was able to get in earlier in the year, in the winter, when they reopened between lockdowns, and now they are open once again. Bookstores opened for browsing last Saturday, but I thought I would be wise and not go out on the first day of things being opened because I'm sure everyone was there. But today I went, and the bookstore had a limit, capacity limit of 12 people, but I was able to go in right away, and there were maybe 8 other people browsing in the shop, but it's quite a good sized shop, so that was fine. But I did purchase, let's see, I've got 5 books here. I purchased 5 books, and I'm going to show them to you here. So I got a couple of great vintage Laurentian Library paperbacks, Morley Callaghan novels here, and I absolutely love these vintage Laurentian Library editions. They're very, very similar to the new Canadian Library editions that were published in and around the same era. These are from the 1950s and 60s, I believe. I should probably just double check the publication dates here. Oh, actually this one is 1973 and this one is 1970. So 60s and 70s when these particular editions were made by Laurentian Library. And I do already own a few of them. I have one of Callaghan's other novels in this edition, but these are 2 novels by him I've not read, although I've read a little bit of Callaghan in the past. I've never really dug completely into his entire library of works. So this one sounds quite interesting. And just as a side note, Book Bazaar gave me 3 of their nice bookmarks. So this one is set in 1920s Toronto. The back says, the narrow provincial Toronto of the late 1920s, the era of jazz, flappers, speakeasies, and bootleggers, is the setting of Morley Callaghan's first novel, originally published in 1928. Harry Trotter is a foreman at a lumberyard, but in his inarticulate way, he is restless and discontented. His job gives him a small prestige, but he seeks a sense of greater power, and at the same time a spiritual release. When he loses his job, he tries sporadically to find another that will gratify his sense of importance. Feeling stifled by his marriage and his wife's modest social ambitions, he leaves her and turns to another woman. Then, through a chance incident, he becomes a successful bootlegger, but is quickly caught up in ruthless gang rivalry and ultimately murder, always struggling with the conflicting emotions that make him a strange fugitive. So, a bootlegger in 1920s Toronto sounds quite exciting, and it'll be interesting to see how his style is in his very first novel ever published. And this one, The Loved and the Lost, one of his later novels, published in 1951, I think, because on the back it says it received the Governor General's Award for fiction in 1951. And this one, just a warning about the language. I'm going to use the language as it's written on the back of the novel, the language that would have been used in 1951. So the synopsis says, Peggy Sanderson refused to recognize color bars of any kind. She thought of people as human beings, treated them as such, and wanted to live her life according to her own nature. But in pursuing her obsession to be accepted by the Negro community of Montreal, she ruined a career, thwarted a marriage, kindled hatreds, and ensured a tragic end for herself. Peggy was many things to many people. To the respectable citizens of Montreal, she was morally suspect and even a dangerous radical. To the Negroes, she was a source of embarrassment and danger. To Jim McAlpine, she was someone to love, to try to reform, and at last to betray. Here is a deceptively straightforward, dramatic treatment of a truly complex and important theme. And then it says that The Loved and the Lost received the Governor General's Award for fiction in 1951. So I'm very interested to see how Callaghan treated this subject matter in the 1950s. And that actually seems like from some of the other Canadian literature of the time that I've read. This seems like a somewhat unique plot line. So there's those. And then I have here a work by French author Jean Genet, Our Lady of the Flowers, in a Grove Press edition. No dust jacket. The dust jacket is missing, but that's fine. This one was just sort of sitting on the shelf and it caught my eye. I've wanted to read some Genet for quite a while. And this one also has an introduction by Jean-Paul Sartre, which is nice. And this is the 1963 third printing. It was originally published in French in 1943, and I think the first English translation here was perhaps in 1950. Nope, that's not correct. It's not telling me when the first English translation was, but it was registered under a different name in French in 1951, and then the introduction here has a copyright of 1952. But I can only assume that this printing, this translation, is from 1963. And I'm looking for the translator here. There is a note from the translator, but it doesn't actually look like the translator is indicated here. That's interesting, and that's not really too uncommon in earlier translated works. Sometimes they just omit the name of the translator as though it's not important, but not sure what this one is about. We'll be interested to dig into it, and I think it's one of Genet's most well-known. Then I have here a book that I've picked up off the shelf at Book Bazaar 2 or 3 times in my browsing over the past 2 years, 2 or so years. And this is a book called Paris Gazette by Furtwängler. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. When I Google this title, I find a few entries from books, from book selling shops, but no reviews, no Goodreads entry. So I'm not really sure what it's about, other than that it is published in 1940, April of 1940, and it does seem to be set during the Second World War. And I think the author's preface here is the most enlightening bit about what this book could possibly be about. So the author's preface says, "In this book, I have made use of 2 motifs from recent history: the kidnapping of an immigrant journalist and the purchase and consequent sabotage of a German immigrant's newspaper by agents of the Third Reich. The actual kidnapping received worldwide notice. Much less is known of the newspaper episode which occurred in German-speaking territory adjacent to the Third Reich. Yet it was only these 2 themes that I borrowed from the world of historical fact. I have not represented in this book any actual living person or any actual event." And he goes on to talk about how the Paris Gazette here is not reflective of any real newspaper, and not one of the characters in this book actually lived in Paris. And it does appear actually here now that the book itself is set in 1935, but obviously I would suspect that some of the writing and much of the editing and whatnot and the way it was marketed probably would have been colored by the impending war. And this author's preface is actually from July of 1939, published in 1940 after the start of the war. And it's quite a thick book, but it's piqued my interest enough times that I thought I would pick it up and give it a try. And I've got one last book here, and this is Selected Letters of Gustave Flaubert. And I've read most of Flaubert's novels. I do quite enjoy his Sentimental Education. Madame Bovary is pretty good. Bouvard and Pichet is also quite good. And so I was interested to come across this older edition of some of his letters. I do believe that most of his letters have been published in the original French, and you can purchase a multi-volume set from various publishers, but they are a lot harder to find translated into English. So this edition is edited, translated, and it has an introduction by Francis Steigermuller. And it's funny because it says author of Flaubert and Madame Bovary, so that indicates that he must have written a biography or some sort of critical work of Flaubert, which I have once again never heard of. We've got somebody's inscription in the front, M.B. Waters, April 1954. I always find that sort of thing interesting. And the dust jacket is wrapped in cellophane, which is nice, preserves it, and the dust jacket is in quite good condition. We have a nice frontispiece, a photograph of the author of Flaubert. Very nice bow tie there. And somebody has penciled in here 1821 to 1880 in red, which I suppose indicates the years that Flaubert lived. That does sound fairly accurate to me to propose that he would have lived 1821 to 1880. First published in Great Britain 1954. This presentation of a portion of Flaubert's correspondence is dedicated to Gerda Stein. There's a nice introduction here, and then we have just a series of his correspondence of letters to Louise Collet, to Maxime Ducamp, to Alfred Le Poitevin, I suppose, to Ernest Chevalier, letters from childhood and youth, and there are some illustrations throughout. So perhaps that is a childhood portrait, crayon sketch by Delaunay, Flaubert as a child, which is quite nice. And I was just interrupted here by a delivery, by my buzzer ringing, but I'll continue on here with this final book. There's some letters in here to Victor Hugo as well, to George Sand, to his brother Achille. So it seems to be a collection of letters to family and to friends and to his peers in the literary world. So this was quite an interesting find to come across. And there's some more works listed on the back of the dust jacket here, which sound quite interesting. They're probably somewhat difficult to find given that this was published in '54. But Baudelaire, a study of his poetry, the classical moment, Corneille, Molière, and Racine, and a work called The Novel in France. 3 studies of French literature by Martin Turnell. So this was a fun find, and it's very neat too to find this 50s dust jacket so well intact. So that's what I've got today. I'm going to not dig into these books today because I think this might be the weekend that I finally finished reading The Recognitions by William Gaddis. And I've got a bottle of port, a comfortable chair, and hopefully I will work my way through the remainder of that novel this weekend. A novel that I was very much enjoying when I was reading it a couple months ago, but a novel that I set aside when I went through a period where I wasn't reading so much and that I've yet to get back to. But I've had a little bit of encouragement to get back to it this week, so I think that's going to be the plan for the rest of the day.